The day I realized Tanya wasn't just stressed about wedding planning was the day she smiled sweetly and made me pay for everyone's lunch, right after another bridesmaid handed her $300 to cover the cost of her dress. Not my lunch, everyone's. And the way she did it, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I should be grateful for the honor of funding her little celebration of herself. It was at a Thai restaurant she insisted on. Dim lights, glossy menus, the kind of place where the server says family style like it's a warm hug. Tanya sat in the center of the table like a queen who'd mistaken friendship for staff. Kevin's mother, Martha, sat beside her with perfect posture and an expression that could freeze boiling water. Rachel, the other bridesmaid, kept glancing at me like she wanted to apologize for breathing. The bill came folded like a secret. Tanya didn't even reach for it. She just tilted her head, eyes bright, voice syrupy. I mean, it's my day, she said, stretching the words like they were evidence. And Rachel already did the gift thing. So, you've got this, right? I remember the heat crawling up my neck, the split second where your brain tries to play catch up with your own reality. Because this was my best friend. 20 years. The girl I met in middle school, the one I cried with in dorm bathrooms, the one who called me soul sister in every caption. And yet here she was, watching me hesitate, enjoying it. I paid. My card machine beep sounded like a slap. Then, 2 weeks later, my boyfriend Greg proposed, and Tanya didn't congratulate me. Instead, she sent a message so vicious it made my stomach drop. You can't get married in my month. And that was only the beginning, because by the time this story ends, Tanya loses her fiancé, her job, her house, and sends me a 10-page letter from therapy trying to rewrite what she did. But the thing people never ask is the part that still haunts me. Why did it take me nearly dying in a hospital bed to finally see what Tanya had been doing to me our whole lives? My name is Danielle. I was 35 when everything with Tanya finally snapped in half. But if I'm honest, the cracks had been there long before that. Quiet, hairline fractures I kept painting over, because it was easier to call it friendship than admit it was starting to feel like a job. I'm a freelance editor, the kind of work people assume is cozy. Coffee shops, laptops, flexible schedules. What they don't see is the constant mental math. Invoices that come late, clients who forget, months where you're fine, and months where you're staring at your rent like it's a cliff edge. I was good at what I did, but good doesn't always mean secure. And then there was Greg, my boyfriend, now my husband. He was 36, steady in a way that used to make me suspicious, like stability was a trick. He worked a normal job with normal hours. When he said he'd be home at 6, he was home at 6. When he promised something, I didn't have to chase him for it. I used to think that's what made me feel safe. I didn't realize it also made Tanya feel threatened. How Tanya and I became inseparable. Tanya and I met in middle school. You know those friendships that feel like a shortcut through life? That's what she was at first. She was loud, funny, fearless. Always the first person to raise her hand. The first person to dare someone to do something stupid. The first person to walk into a room like it owed her attention. And I was the quieter one, the observer, the girl who listened more than she spoke, who noticed tone shifts and micro-expressions, who could sense when someone was about to cry before they knew it themselves. Tanya liked that about me. She called me her ground. The truth was, I became her cushion. We stayed close through high school, then college. Breakups, roommate drama, terrible part-time jobs, cheap wine nights, crying in cars. Tanya always had a story, always had a crisis, always had someone who did her wrong. And I always had a role, the calm one, the fixer, the one who found the words, made the calls, smoothed the mess. Over time, that became our rhythm. Tanya shined, I supported. And because I loved her, because she was family in my mind, I told myself that's what real friendship was, carrying each other. But if I rewind honestly, it was almost always me carrying her. The pattern I ignored because it was just Tanya. Tanya had a gift. She could make you feel like you were lucky to be included in her orbit. She'd say things like, "You're the only one who gets me. I don't trust anyone the way I trust you. Everyone else is jealous. You're different." It sounds sweet when you're 19. It sounds like loyalty. When you're 35, it starts to sound like a cage. If I disagreed with her, she'd go quiet, like she'd turned off the lights in the room and left me standing there. If I pushed back, she'd disappear for days, then come back with a breezy, "I needed space," as if I was the unreasonable one for noticing she'd punished me with silence. And the worst part? I trained myself not to notice. Because Tanya didn't do screaming fights. She did absence. She did vibes. She did subtext so thick you could choke on it. When Kevin entered the picture, about 3 months before my engagement, Tanya got engaged to Kevin. Kevin was 38, polite, controlled, the kind of man who always thanked the server. He came from a wealthy family, and Tanya loved that detail like it was a designer label stitched into his personality. I remember the way she said it the first time, casual, but with glitter in her eyes. His mom's very traditional, she told me, like that was both a warning and a brag. That mom was Martha, 62, and if you've ever met someone who speaks softly but makes you feel judged anyway, you know Martha. She didn't have to insult you. Her eyebrows did it for her. Tanya, of course, framed it like she was the victim. Martha's trying to control everything, she'd say. But then she'd also say things like, well, she's paying, so... with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Even then, I felt that tug in my gut, like something didn't sit right. But I told myself I was overthinking. Tanya was stressed. Weddings made people weird. That's what we tell ourselves when we're trying to keep a relationship alive. Maid of honor, the moment the roles locked in. Then Tanya asked me to be her maid of honor. Her voice came through my phone, bright and triumphant, like she was offering me a trophy. Obviously, it's you, she said. No one else could do it. I felt honored. Truly. I said yes immediately. Because that's what you do when your best friend asks you to stand beside her for the biggest day of her life. But the words no one else could do it, they weren't about love. They were about labor. Because Tanya wasn't looking for support, she was looking for a manager. The day of the dress shopping trip, she scheduled wedding dress shopping like it was a production. I drove 2 hours to meet her. The kind of drive where you start out excited, music up, hair tied back, imagining her in white, and by the time you arrive, you're already tired, already low-grade annoyed, but telling yourself it's fine, because it's for her. There were 4 of us. Tanya, the bride. Me, maid of honor. Rachel, the other bridesmaid, 33. Martha, Kevin's mom. Tanya walked into the bridal shop like she owned it. She knew what she wanted. She knew what looked good on her body, and she loved that we were there to witness it. And I'll give her this. She did look beautiful in the dress she chose, a stunning gown with delicate beadwork that caught the light like it was made to be admired. But the price tag was $1,300. Tanya had told the consultant her budget was $1,000. At the register, Tanya did this performance I'd seen 100 times. Big size, hand on chest. Oh no, I guess I'll have to cut flowers. Or centerpieces. She looked around, not directly at anyone, but enough to plant the idea. It was the same tactic she used when we were kids and wanted her parents to buy her something they said no to. Back then it was a pair of boots. Now it was a wedding dress. I stayed quiet because I truly didn't have money to burn. My rent was due soon, and freelance life doesn't care about your best friend's beadwork. Then Rachel, sweet Rachel, stepped in. I'll cover the extra $300, she said, smiling a little too hard, as a wedding gift. Tanya launched herself into a hug like Rachel had just donated a kidney. And for a moment I thought, okay, crisis solved. But then Tanya did something that made the air change. She took the entire $300 and handed it to the consultant as a tip. Not 10, not 20, 300. The consultant blinked like she couldn't believe it. Rachel's smile froze on her face, and I watched the realization crawl over her, slow, humiliating, sharp. Her gift had been used like a prop, and Tanya didn't even notice the damage. Or worse, she noticed and didn't care. On the drive to lunch afterward, Martha offered Tanya a family heirloom pearl necklace, something that had belonged to Kevin's grandmother. Tanya accepted it with a reverent little gasp, like she was starring in a movie about herself. I remember looking out the car window thinking, this isn't about love, this is about winning. And somehow, even with that thought sitting heavy in my chest, I still didn't stop the train. Because I hadn't learned yet that the people who use you rarely do it with cruelty. Most of the time, they do it with a smile. If part 2 was where the warning lights flickered, then part 3 was where the alarm started ringing, and I kept turning the volume down. The lunch that changed how I saw everything, after the dress was paid for and Rachel's gift was quietly sacrificed at the altar of Tanya's ego, we went to lunch. Tanya insisted on a Thai restaurant across town, not because it was convenient, not because everyone liked Thai food, but because she'd heard it was good and wanted to try it before her wedding events ramped up. We slid into a booth, Tanya in the center again, of course. Martha sat straight-backed, arms folded. Rachel sat beside me, unusually quiet. Menus opened. Drinks ordered. Tanya talked nonstop about florals, table linens, how the lighting had to be romantic but not dim, how she didn't want anything to look cheap. I noticed something small but telling. She never asked what anyone else wanted. When the server came back, Tanya ordered for herself without hesitation. Rachel ordered quickly, like she didn't want to take up space. Martha ordered politely. The server looked at me. I ordered last. When the food came, Tanya tasted everything like a critic. She made faces, pushed plates around, complained that the curry wasn't authentic enough. And when the check arrived, she didn't even pretend. She leaned back and smiled. Well, she said lightly, I shouldn't have to pay. It's my day. Then she glanced at Rachel. And you already did the $300 thing. Her eyes slid to me. So, you've got this, right? The way she said it wasn't a request. It was an expectation. The table went quiet. I felt my pulse in my ears. I thought about my rent, my utilities, the fact that my freelance invoice from last month still hadn't cleared. But what I said was, sure, because that's who I had trained myself to be. I paid. The receipt curled in my hand like evidence I wasn't ready to process yet. When we stood to leave, I cracked open a fortune cookie, something silly, automatic. The slip inside read, "The truest friends see both your value and your cost." At the time, I laughed it off. Now it feels like a prophecy I tried to ignore. Greg's proposal. Joy with an aftertaste. 2 weeks later, Greg proposed. It wasn't flashy. No audience, no production. We'd gone for a walk near the park where we used to sit when we first started dating. The light was soft. The moment felt unhurried. He got down on one knee and asked me to marry him like he was asking me to build a life, not perform one. I cried. I said yes. And the first person I called? Tanya. I expected squealing, screaming, celebration. Instead, her voice came through the phone, tight. Oh, she said. Was this expected? I laughed, still shaking. Not really. We talked about marriage, but I didn't know he was planning it now. There was a pause. And you didn't pressure him? She asked. The word pressure landed wrong. I told her we'd seen a financial planner together months ago, because we're adults and we plan things. Silence. Then she changed the subject completely. She launched into a rant about Martha, how she was trying to steal her thunder by inviting extended family, how she wanted control without strings, how unfair it all was. I sat there, staring at the ring on my finger, listening to my best friend talk over one of the biggest moments of my life. By the time we hung up, my excitement had dulled into confusion. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself she'd come around. The text that made it impossible to pretend. About a month later, Greg and I started looking at venues. Almost everything was booked for the year, except a few dates in early October. Tanya's wedding was scheduled for late October. No overlapping guests, no shared vendors, no conflict. I sent her a careful, polite text. Hey, we're looking at early October dates, about 2 weeks before your wedding. Just wanted to check if you had any pre-wedding events planned that might overlap. Her response came fast. Explosive. Well, we spent 30 minutes yesterday talking about how Martha is trying to steal my thunder. So now I'm either getting my thunder stolen by her and my maid of honor, or I'm the jerk who tells you that you can't get married when you want to. I stared at my phone like it had betrayed me. Steal her thunder? 2 weddings, 2 weeks apart, 0 shared guests. I tried to respond calmly. She kept ranting about marathon schedules, traffic, how it's not just a party. Then she stopped replying altogether. This was Tanya's favorite move. Disappearance disguised as boundaries. Days passed, then more. I finally sent a longer message, apologizing for how my wording might have come across, clarifying I wasn't asking permission, just trying to avoid conflict. She responded days later, accepting my apology, but with a condition. She wanted me to drive 2 hours to her place that weekend to talk it out. I agreed. Because at that point, I still believed I could fix it. The day my body forced me to stop, the night before I was supposed to drive out, I woke up in agony, a sharp, tearing pain in my side that made it hard to breathe. By evening, I was in the emergency room. The diagnosis came fast and terrifying. Acute liver failure. I spent the next week in and out of the hospital, hooked up to IVs, on painkillers strong enough to blur time. From my hospital bed, I texted Tanya. I explained what was happening. I apologized for missing our meeting. She didn't respond. Days turned into weeks. My messages sat unread while she posted daily on Instagram quotes about boundaries, betrayal, and protecting your energy. That was when something finally shifted inside me. Not anger. Clarity. I realized that if nearly dying wasn't enough to make her care, then she never really had. There's a specific kind of silence that happens in a hospital room at night. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that amplifies every thought you've been avoiding. Machines hummed softly beside me. The hallway lights bled under the door in a thin, yellow line. My phone sat on the tray table within reach. Screen dark, notifications empty. I had texted Tanya 3 times. The first message was factual. I'm in the ER. They think it's serious. The second was apologetic. I'm so sorry I can't come this weekend. The third was instinctive. Muscle memory more than choice. I hope you understand. She never opened any of them. Meanwhile, she was online, posting, smiling. I watched one of her Instagram stories replay on a loop. Tanya in a mirror selfie, hair perfectly done, captioned with some vague quote about protecting your peace from people who drain you. I stared at it until my chest hurt more than my side. That was the moment the story changed. Not because she ignored me, but because she did it on purpose. Seeing the pattern without the blur. When you're sick, really sick, your brain stops performing for other people. There's no energy left to justify, excuse, or reinterpret reality into something more comfortable. And lying there, half-medicated, watching Tanya's silence stretch on, I started replaying everything with new eyes. The dress shop, Rachel's $300. The lunch bill slid toward me without shame. The way Tanya's joy evaporated the moment I told her about my engagement. That text about stealing her thunder. This wasn't stress. This was entitlement. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I should have asked years ago. What does Tanya actually give me? Not memories, not history. Now, the answer sat heavy and undeniable. Nothing. The public rewrite of reality. A month passed. I was home from the hospital, weak but recovering. My body felt fragile, like it had betrayed me, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. That's when Tanya finally opened my messages. No, are you okay? No, I'm sorry I disappeared. Instead, she posted long captions, carefully worded, vague enough to deny, specific enough to sting. She wrote about betrayal, about people who claim to love you but show their true colors when things get hard, about learning to set boundaries with those who make everything about themselves. People commented with heart emojis and praise for her strength. I sat on my couch, phone in my lap, pulse slow and steady this time, and something inside me went cold. She wasn't just ignoring me. She was replacing the truth. And suddenly I saw the future clearly. If I stayed quiet, this would become the story. I would be the selfish friend, the dramatic one, the woman who chose her wedding over her best friend. And Tanya would never correct it, choosing not to fight, and why that mattered. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't defend myself. For the first time in 20 years, I didn't try to fix the narrative. Instead, I blocked her. It wasn't dramatic. No announcement. No closure speech. Just a quiet decision made by a woman who finally understood that protecting herself didn't require permission. Greg noticed the change before I said anything. He sat beside me on the couch one evening, careful not to jostle my still healing body. She hasn't reached out, he said gently. Has she? I shook my head. He didn't say good. He just took my hand and squeezed it, like he understood that some endings don't feel like relief at first. They feel like grief for the version of someone you hoped would exist. The engagement that no longer felt heavy, with Tanya gone, truly gone, the wedding planning felt different. Lighter. Greg and I looked at each other one night, surrounded by open tabs and venue brochures, and laughed. No one is going to care about our centerpieces, I said. He smiled. Do you? I didn't. And in that moment, we made a decision that would have horrified the version of me who still lived under Tanya's emotional weather. We scrapped the big wedding. No venue drama, no seating charts, no expectations. We booked a trip to Hawaii, a beach, immediate family, peace. It felt like choosing oxygen. The final confirmation. Just when I thought the story was over, it knocked again. An email arrived 2 weeks later. The sender's name stopped me cold. Rachel. But the email address was unfamiliar. The tone, off. She asked if I was still planning to be Tanya's maid of honor. My stomach sank. Rachel and I had never emailed. She was married. She used her married name. And the phrasing, the passive-aggressive politeness, the circular logic, it was unmistakable. This wasn't Rachel. This was Tanya, trying to pull me back in without ever speaking my name. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because by then, I finally understood something simple and devastating. People who need control will always reach for it, even when you're gone. They just call it something prettier. Recovery is supposed to be quiet. Soft blankets, warm tea, reassuring checkups. What no one tells you is that healing your body sometimes rips your emotional defenses wide open. While my liver slowly stabilized, my mind refused to rest. Without Tanya's constant noise, her texts, her demands, her emotional gravity, I was left alone with the truth. And once you see a pattern clearly, you can't unsee it. I started replaying moments I'd filed away as normal. Every time Tanya forgot her wallet, every time she expected me to rearrange my schedule because hers mattered more, every time my successes were met with silence, discomfort, or a quick pivot back to her problems. It wasn't cruelty in the obvious sense, it was erosion. And I had helped. That realization hurt more than anything Tanya had done. The guilt that tried to pull me back. There were days I felt guilty for cutting her off. 20 years is a long time, long enough for obligation to disguise itself as loyalty. I caught myself thinking, maybe she didn't know how sick I really was. Maybe I should explain. Maybe I overreacted. Then I'd remember the hospital bed, the IV, the pain that stole my breath, and the silence. You don't accidentally ignore someone who tells you they're in organ failure. That's a choice. The first ripple, other people start talking. About 2 weeks after I blocked Tanya, I got a message from Diana, a mutual friend from high school. She didn't accuse, she didn't pry. She just asked, "Are you okay?" Something about that, how simple it was, made my chest tighten. We talked on the phone that night. I told her the truth, not dramatically, not defensively, just factually. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Diana said quietly, "That makes a lot of sense." She told me Tanya had been posting more intensely, more cryptic, more emotional. She said people were starting to feel uncomfortable, not sympathetic, just confused. "She keeps saying people betrayed her," Diana said, "but when someone asks how, she changes the subject." That was the first time I realized something important. I wasn't the only one seeing it anymore. Choosing not to confront, and why that mattered. There's a version of this story where I confront Tanya directly, where I demand accountability, where I send screenshots, where I expose her lies publicly. That version would have felt satisfying for about 5 minutes. But the truth is, confrontation only works when the other person is capable of hearing it. Tanya wasn't. She didn't want resolution. She wanted control restored. And I wasn't going to give her that. So instead I did something quieter and much harder. I stayed gone, reclaiming my engagement. Greg watched all of this with careful restraint. He never told me what to do, never pushed. One night, while I was still weak enough to lean against him for balance, he said something simple that landed deeper than any advice. "You don't seem smaller without her," he said. "You seem steadier." He was right. For the first time since our engagement, I felt like it belonged to us. We planned our Hawaii wedding slowly, thoughtfully. No audience, no competition, no comparison. Every choice felt intentional instead of defensive. And that's when I understood something that shifted everything. Tanya didn't just want to be first. She wanted to be central. And my life no longer had room for a center that wasn't my own. The body keeps the score. As my strength returned, so did my clarity. My doctor told me stress likely played a role in my liver failure, not the sole cause, but a contributor. I thought about that for a long time. How many times had I swallowed discomfort to keep the peace? How many times had my body absorbed what my mouth refused to say? Healing wasn't just about getting better. It was about not getting sick again in the same way. The line I finally drew, the last thing I did, before fully letting go, was archive every photo of Tanya and me. Not delete. Archive. I wasn't erasing the past, I was relocating it. Some relationships aren't villains, they're just expired. And keeping them around only poisons what comes next. When I closed my phone that night, there was no dramatic relief. Just a deep, unfamiliar calm. The kind that comes when you stop arguing with reality. I didn't find out what happened to Tanya because I went looking. That's the part that still feels important to say. Her world didn't fall apart because I watched it burn. It fell apart because the scaffolding she'd built it on, money that wasn't hers, validation that had limits, people she thought would always bend, finally gave way. And the news came to me in fragments. The first crack, a wedding that quietly vanished. About a month after I blocked Tanya, Diana called me again. Her voice was hesitant, like she wasn't sure whether to speak or stay silent. "Did you hear about Tanya and Kevin?" she asked. I hadn't. According to Diana, the wedding had been postponed indefinitely. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. This surprised me more than I expected. Tanya had treated that wedding like oxygen. Every detail had been a symbol of her worth. The idea that it could simply disappear didn't fit the image she'd projected. Diana hesitated before continuing. "She's not doing great," she said carefully. "Something's wrong." The house that was never hers. A few days later, Greg showed me one of Tanya's Instagram posts. I'd unfollowed her long ago, but he still followed out of what he called morbid curiosity. The post was a carousel of heavily filtered selfies, Eyes glassy, smile forced, paired with a caption about how everything in her life was falling apart at once. Her relationship, her job, her housing situation. That word, housing, caught my attention. I called Diana back. What she told me made my stomach drop. The house Tanya had bragged about, the one she claimed she and Kevin had worked so hard to buy, had never been hers. Kevin's family, specifically Martha, had purchased it outright in cash. The deed was in Martha's name. It was meant to be a conditional wedding gift, to be transferred after the marriage. Suddenly, everything made sense. Tanya hadn't hated Martha because she was controlling. She hated her because she held the leverage. The job meltdown no one could clean up. Then there was Tanya's job. Diana heard this part through mutual contacts, people who worked in the same professional circles. Apparently, Tanya had a meltdown at work. Not a bad day, not a tense meeting. A meltdown. She screamed at her boss in front of clients, accused people of undermining her, stormed out mid-project. In an industry built on reputation, that kind of behavior spreads fast. Phones stopped ringing. Emails stopped coming. She wasn't just unemployed. She was quietly blacklisted. The same charm that once smoothed everything over didn't work anymore. The necklace. The final piece came a week later, and it still makes my chest tighten. Kevin discovered that Tanya had pawned the pearl necklace, the family heirloom Martha had given her the day of the dress shopping. He found the pawn ticket by accident, tucked into her purse while looking for car keys. When he confronted her, Tanya didn't deny it. She admitted she'd pawned it to buy designer shoes. Not rent, not bills, shoes. That was the end. Kevin called off the engagement immediately. Because the house was never in Tanya's name, she had to move out. Because the job was gone, she had nowhere to land. Because she'd burned through friendships the way she burned through money, there was no safety net left. Watching without celebrating. When Diana finished telling me everything, I sat in silence for a long time. I didn't feel victorious. I felt heavy. This wasn't karma in a cinematic sense. There was no satisfaction in it. Just a quiet understanding that consequences don't always look like justice. They look like exposure. Tanya hadn't been unlucky. She'd been revealed. Diana mentioned that Tanya had reached out to her, asking for a place to stay, claiming everyone had abandoned her. Diana said no. Not out of cruelty. Out of history. She never pays people back, Diana said. Not money, not emotionally. I understood that more deeply than I wanted to. The strangest emotion of all. That night, Greg asked me how I felt. I thought about it carefully before answering. I feel relieved, I said finally. But not because she's suffering. He waited. I'm relieved because I don't have to keep wondering if I was wrong, I said. The pattern didn't end with me. And that mattered. Because it meant the boundary I'd set wasn't abandonment. It was alignment. Her world was collapsing, not because I stepped away, but because it was never built to hold anyone else upright. People assume the darkest moment in a story like this is when everything explodes. The fights, the fallout, the public collapse. But for me, the lowest point came after the noise faded, when there was nothing left to react to. No crisis, no adrenaline, no Tanya. Just space. And grief has a way of filling space when you finally stop running. Mourning someone who's still alive. I didn't miss Tanya the way you miss a person. I missed the idea of her. The girl who used to sit on my bed in middle school, legs crossed, whispering secrets like they mattered. The version of us that stayed up all night, talking about the future like we were building it together. The belief that someone had known me for 20 years and still chose me. Letting go of Tanya meant admitting something painful. That version of her might never have existed the way I remembered. And that meant I had grieved a friendship I'd already been losing for years, without knowing it. Some nights, that realization hit harder than her betrayal. The body remembers what the mind avoids. My doctor cleared me to resume normal activities slowly, but emotionally, I felt fragile in a different way. I'd wake up with a tight chest, not from illness, but from memory. A laugh she used to have, a joke only we shared, a photo that surfaced in my camera roll without warning. I didn't reach out, but I didn't feel strong either. I felt hollow, like a room after the furniture's been moved out. Clean, empty, echoing. The fear underneath the clarity. One night, I admitted something to Greg I hadn't even fully admitted to myself. What if I'm the problem? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. What if I let this go on because I'm bad at choosing people? I continued. What if I missed the signs because I wanted to? Greg turned toward me fully then. That doesn't make you broken, he said. It makes you human. But the fear stayed. Because once you accept that someone you loved treated you badly for years, the next question is unavoidable. How did I allow it? And that question can either harden you or teach you. The temptation to reopen the door. This was the phase where forgiveness tempted me, not because it was earned, but because it was familiar. I imagined Tanya reaching out, suddenly self-aware, suddenly changed. I imagined the relief of things going back to normal. That fantasy was dangerous, because normal was where I disappeared. I realized something uncomfortable. If Tanya had called me crying that week, I might have answered. Not because she deserved it, but because I was still unlearning who I'd been with her. That scared me more than her anger ever had. Sitting with the truth instead of rushing past it, so I did something I'd never done before. I let myself be sad without fixing it. I didn't rush to replace the friendship. I didn't fill the silence with justification. I didn't try to make meaning out of it too quickly. I let the grief exist. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The sadness changed texture. It stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like release. The realization that steadied me. One afternoon, while sorting old photos, I noticed something I'd never seen before. In almost every picture of Tanya and me, I was leaning toward her. Physically, emotionally, always adjusting to her center of gravity. That was the moment I understood. Losing her didn't make my life smaller. It made it balanced for the first time. And that realization didn't lift me out of the dark immediately, but it gave me something solid to stand on. I wasn't lonely. I was recalibrating. And sometimes that feels exactly the same. The turning point didn't arrive with a confrontation. It came with a message, quiet, unexpected, and finally honest. The coffee request I didn't expect. About 6 months after everything with Tanya fell apart, I received a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Danielle. This is Kevin. I know this is out of the blue, but I was hoping we could meet for coffee. I owe you an apology." I stared at the screen for a long time. Kevin had never been my friend. Not really. He was Tanya's fiancé, part of the life she curated and controlled. But something in his message felt different. No defensiveness, no angle. Just tired. Curiosity won. Caution came with me. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. Neutral ground, public, safe. Kevin looked thinner than I remembered. Older somehow. Not defeated, just stripped of illusion. He didn't waste time. "I found out the truth," he said. "About you, about the wedding, about everything." The lies finally exposed. Kevin told me Tanya had fed him an entirely different story. In her version, I had deliberately scheduled my wedding to compete with hers. I had refused to accommodate her plans. I had faked my illness to avoid responsibility. I had even encouraged her to pawn the pearl necklace out of jealousy. She had shown him fake text conversations, screenshots edited just enough to look real. My hands went cold as he spoke. Kevin only discovered the truth when he mentioned this to Rachel, the same Rachel who'd given the $300 and watched it disappear. Rachel set the record straight immediately. She showed Kevin her actual messages. The timeline collapsed under scrutiny. "I should have questioned it sooner," Kevin said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't." I believed him. Not because he asked me to, but because he wasn't asking for absolution. He was offering accountability. The missing pieces fall into place. Kevin filled in the gaps I hadn't known. The necklace wasn't the first incident, it was the last straw. For months, Tanya had treated Martha with open contempt, mocked her in front of family, excluded her from planning, accepted money while complaining about the conditions attached to it. Martha's offer, $25,000 for the venue, came with a reasonable request: include her siblings and their spouses on the guest list. Tanya took the money, then tried to cut the relatives anyway. The house, too, had conditions. It would transfer after the wedding. Given Tanya's spending habits and credit history, it was the only way Kevin could protect them both. When Kevin ended the engagement, he didn't just leave. He closed the door. Locks changed. Movers hired. Tanya's belongings placed neatly in the garage with a note explaining it was over. Kevin's voice shook when he described the night Tanya showed up at Martha's house, pounding on the door, demanding to be let in. The police escorted her away. He didn't sound triumphant. He sounded exhausted. A choice I didn't realize I had. At the end of our coffee, Kevin reached into his pocket and placed a small box on the table. Inside was a silver bracelet with a tiny charm, a fortune cookie. "I found this in her things," he said. "She bought it after the dress shopping day. I think it was meant for you." I didn't cry. I felt centered. That message again, echoing through time. The truest friends see both your value and your cost. I realized then that the turning point wasn't learning the truth. It was understanding that I didn't need to prove it. My life didn't require Tanya's version or Kevin's validation to move forward. I had already chosen. Stepping into my own authority, I left the coffee shop lighter than I'd felt in months. Not because I was vindicated, but because I was free. Free from wondering if I'd misunderstood. free from rehearsing explanations, free from the urge to correct the record. The truth had surfaced without my intervention. And for the first time, I trusted myself enough to let that be enough. By the time the dust settled, I wasn't in the blast radius anymore. That was the strangest part. Tanya's life didn't unravel in a dramatic cascade. It thinned out. Opportunities dried up. Invitations stopped coming. People didn't announce their distance. They just stopped answering. And I watched it all from the quiet stability of my own life, not because I was waiting for justice, but because news has a way of traveling, even when you don't ask for it. Where Tanya landed. Through Diana, I learned that Tanya eventually found work at a retail store. Not a temporary stop, not a figuring things out phase. A reality check. She moved in with a coworker, smaller space, shared rent, no curated aesthetic. According to Diana, Tanya complained constantly about being misunderstood, about people abandoning her when she needed them most. What she never mentioned was why they left. Patterns don't break easily. The apology that came too late, almost a year after everything ended, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. My name written carefully on the front. Tanya. Inside were 10 pages, handwritten on expensive stationery, the kind that announces sincerity before you even read the words. She wrote about therapy, about hitting rock bottom, about being told she might have narcissistic personality disorder. She admitted she'd manipulated people, used charm instead of accountability, confused entitlement with self-worth. She apologized for the wedding, the silence, the fake email, the lies to Kevin, dismissing my illness. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She said she just wanted me to know she was doing the work. I didn't rush to respond. I let the letter sit for days. When I finally replied, it was short. I thanked her for the apology. I wished her well. I made it clear I didn't want to rebuild the friendship. Forgiveness doesn't require access. My life unfolding quietly. While Tanya tried to reconstruct herself, my life was expanding in small, solid ways. Greg and I got married in Hawaii. Barefoot, ocean behind us, only immediate family present. No drama, no comparison, no centerpieces worth fighting over. 6 months later, I found out I was pregnant. Planned, wanted, with a man who'd never made me compete for space. When I think about that timing now, it still feels poetic in a way I didn't design. What I let go of made room for what mattered. The last loose thread. A few weeks ago, I ran into Rachel at the grocery store. She hugged me tightly, longer than expected. She told me Tanya had sent her a similar apology letter. Rachel accepted the apology, but like me, chose not to rekindle the friendship. She's trying, Rachel said. I hope it sticks. So do I. But hope doesn't mean obligation. Closure without ceremony. I wore the fortune cookie bracelet Kevin gave me for a while. Not as a reminder of Tanya, but as a reminder of myself. Eventually, I took it off. Not because I was still hurt, but because I didn't need the reminder anymore. I know my value now, and I no longer confuse history with loyalty. Do you want to continue to part 10, ending and lesson? Continue part 10, ending and lesson. What I kept, what I released. A year ago, if you'd asked me what losing Tanya would feel like, I would have said devastating. I would have imagined loneliness, regret, a permanent ache where 20 years of history used to live. That's not what happened. What I felt instead, slowly, quietly, was space. The kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. Life didn't transform overnight. There were no dramatic speeches, no final confrontations, no moment where everything suddenly made sense. It just softened. Mornings became calmer. Decisions felt lighter. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head, stopped checking my phone with that familiar tension, wondering what emotional emergency might be waiting. I hadn't realized how much of my energy had been spent managing someone else's reactions. Without that weight, I could finally hear my own thoughts. The lesson I didn't want, but needed. Here's the truth I avoided for years. A boundary isn't something you set to punish someone else. It's something you set so you can survive. Tanya didn't lose her world because I walked away. She lost it because her world was built on people bending until they broke. And I had been bending for a long time. Walking away didn't make me cruel, it made me honest. Marriage without an audience. Greg and I are raising our child now in a life that feels deliberately quiet. We don't perform happiness, we don't explain our choices. Our marriage isn't loud, but it's steady, and that steadiness is something I protect fiercely, because I know now how rare it is. Forgiveness redefined. People ask me if I've forgiven Tanya. I usually pause before answering. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's not something you owe someone because they're trying. Forgiveness, to me, is letting go of the hope that the past could have been different. And I've done that. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. But I also don't invite her back into a space she once treated like a stage. Some bridges don't need rebuilding, they just need acknowledgement. What I'd tell you, if this story sounds familiar, if you're watching this and seeing someone in your own life reflected back at you, someone who always needs more, who calls control boundaries, who treats your milestones like competition, listen to that discomfort. It's not disloyal to step back. It's not selfish to choose peace. And it's not your job to shrink so someone else can feel tall. I kept the memories that were real. I released the role that was harming me. And in doing so, I didn't lose 20 years of friendship. I gained the rest of my life.